I never thought this day would come, but I've become a React YouTuber. Hey guys, today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. It seems like every single YouTuber is saying that nowadays, but today we actually are doing something a little bit different because I've never actually reacted to something and posted it on my channel before. But this topic was just super extremely interesting to me because not only is it related to card games because, well, it's Ben Brode, but it's also related to, Hearthstone because, it's Ben Brode. But this is me reacting to the video Designing Marvel Snap, where Ben Brode was essentially giving, a TED Talk over at GDC, and it's a really awesome gaming convention specifically for game designers, to where they can talk about, the challenges and the problem solving that they had to do in order to create the games that you enjoy to this day. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff in this video, and I'm not going to spoil too much of it because it is an hour-long video, but I wanted to let you guys know exactly what is coming up. But pretty much it's just me giving my takes on what Ben Brode is saying about game design within card game space in general, and how Hearthstone actually influenced Marvel Snap, because obviously it had to, because it's the creator of the game leaving the company that he originally started with and then trying out his own thing with a different company. So if you like this kind of content, feel free to like this video and subscribe over to the YouTube channel, because I don't know if this is something you guys want to see more often, but I thought this was relevant and I wanted to try and do something a little bit different to see what everyone's opinion on Marvel Snap is, because it's a game I'm very interested in and I want to start playing it a little bit more. But as a free-to-play player, there are some concerns, the monetization and yada yada yada. I don't like the monetization, but for this react video, there's not a lot of topics concerning that. It is mostly concerning, designing the game, making sure that it's the most amount of fun, that people don't have overly negative experiences when losing. And that is one thing that I'm going to go ahead and spoil, is that the reason why I really wanted to watch this video is because I was watching it in my downtime when I wasn't streaming, when I wasn't playing any games, and I was just really intrigued with the conversation of how the cube mechanic works. But it's mostly focusing on the design within the game, and that was one reason why I really wanted to highlight this, because it is a game I'm very interested in. And if you aren't a fan of the monetization, then this is just about the actual game design and the philosophies that went into making the game as fun and, most importantly, as least frustrating as possible. Because that's one thing that I actually like over Marvel Snap versus Hearthstone, is that the retreat mechanic and the cube mechanic, they add a completely different sense of how to play the game than a regular Hearthstone game. And in one of the clips coming up ahead, Ben Brode is actually saying that, in Hearthstone games, sometimes you have to take that 5% in order to win that game, because it's either win or lose, versus in Marvel Snap, what if you just made a retreat happen to where that players don't have to go through these really extremely difficult outs in order to actually win games. But I'm not going to spoil anything else. I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what to expect in this video. But regardless, I just thought it was really interesting, and I had to share it with all of you. There may be some more reactions on the Twitch channel, so go ahead and check out twitch.tv/ClarkHellScream in case you want to see me do these kind of things live. But I'm going to be doing a lot more Twitch streams every single day for this entire month, so if that's something you're sounding like you're interested in, go ahead and check out the Twitch channel. I hope you guys enjoyed this perspective on designing Marvel Snap, as well as my takes on it as well. And we'll see you for the next video. Okay, so this is the whole point of today was to eventually watch this. Second, let's watch this video. It's about an hour. It's all about Ben Brode's time explaining the game design of Marvel Snap. And I think this actually has a lot of really good stuff for it. So let me turn off the music.
Ben Brode. I've got a clicker. Okay, here we go. Let me make sure my clicker works. There we go, okay. I'm the Chief Development Officer at Second Dinner, where over the last 5 years, we made Marvel Snap. Before that, I spent the last 15 years at Blizzard, doing QA and other things for Warcraft 3, World of Warcraft, Diablo 2, and some other stuff. But I spent most of my time there on Hearthstone, where I was the first game designer and eventually the game director on that game.
Why did you leave, Ben Brode?
I have a successful rap career on YouTube.
Why did you leave us?
But I'm mostly known for having a weird laugh. This is holding up better than I thought.
Laugh.
So far, so good. Okay. Okay. So this time,
I'm gonna watch the whole thing right now. Yeah, we're gonna watch the whole thing.
Marvel Snap.
I need an hour away from Hearthstone right now.
And over the next hour, I'm going to talk about everything we tried, the stuff that worked, the stuff that didn't work.
And there's a lot of interesting stuff he's going to point out that didn't
Mostly
work,
about the
what I've seen
core
so far.
gameplay of Marvel Snap. And I was going to show you an outline, but instead I'm just going to show you every slide of the presentation. That's it. That's the whole presentation. And as you can see, there's no cute cat images, so keep your expectations low, please. Marvel Snap is a mobile-first, super-fast digital collectible card game where Players compete to win 2 out of 3 locations by playing cards to locations and trying to
dude, these
add up
are
all their
beta
power,
images
their
right
cards
here.
to get the highest total power on their side. We did some crazy stuff like make all of our cards in 3D. But one of the biggest things that we did is add this cool betting and bluffing mechanic.
There's a cute cat picture.
With the cube where
He
you
lied
snap
to
on it
us.
to double the stakes of the game.
Game directors lying to gamers. You would have thought.
Wow. Okay, I'll buy you a copy, sir.
Wait, I missed that.
Okay,
one.
so to double the stakes of the game. How many of y'all have tried Marble Snap? Okay, I'll buy you a copy, sir. Okay, so step 1, inspiration. Designers are like chefs. For the most part, we don't invent new ingredients. We take ingredients that already exist and combine them in new and exciting ways. For example, you might give 2 different chefs flour, water, tomato, basil, and cheese, and one of them might make pizza. The other one might make pasta. But the pasta chef wouldn't go to the pizza chef and say, Ray, I invented flour. All right, that's my thing. You took flour from me. It's not about inventing new ingredients. It's about how we mix them.
Yep, how you use them.
And sometimes people find really exciting ways.
Why do you think Taco Bell is a successful company? They didn't invent tacos. It's definitely not even Mexican food, but they know how to make nacho cheese work in a gordita. Like, it's not brain science.
Old ingredients, like this fellow online I found who has a recipe for basil tomato cheesecake. So as fans of games, we gather ingredients.
I like tomatoes and basil, but in a cheesecake? But
I wanted to talk about how I approach ingredient gathering differently as I start a new project. So I'm going to talk about...
So Ben Brode is teaching us lessons in how to cook. I hope you guys brought out your chef's hat, because we're cooking right now. We're learning...
how we did this for Marble Snap. But one of the things we tried on Snap, some of the things we tried on Snap were either the result of lessons I learned on my time on Hearthstone that worked really well for us.
I mean,
or
something else that's also important. Like, if you're ever trying to make anything, like if you're trying to make people understand a concept, using food as an example is the easiest way to make people understand.
The result of some hard lessons I learned while on Hearthstone, I want to do it a little differently for Snap. So I'm going to tell a few Hearthstone stories along the way here, starting with my first visit to the supermarket 15 years ago. So 15 years ago, I started working on Hearthstone, and this is before the App Store existed, before the iPad was announced. In 2008, when people talked about mobile games, they were talking about Game Boy games. So the first thing I did when I joined the Hearthstone team was play literally every game in the digital collectible card game genre.
Really, really true. And that is something to point out. Like, regardless of what your opinion on Ben Brode is, this is like the gold mine of information. You know, like this, like everything he's saying, it makes sense.
For playing these games, sometimes I found a new ingredient I was excited to try.
I played
Sometimes I just found out I didn't like onions or something. But that's still really valuable. For example, I didn't know that I wouldn't enjoy a grid-based card combat system in a collectible card game until I played all these games. And it's way cheaper.
Hold on a minute. He's including Chain of Memories because you actually use cards. It's like the worst card game though. It's the worst Kingdom Hearts game because it's also the worst card game. But yeah, it's just funny how this is on the list.
By playing someone else's games and to prototype it yourself and learn it that way. But despite there having been a fair number of digital collectible card games in 2008, most of the inspirations for Hearthstone came from physical games. So here's the recipe for Hearthstone's core gameplay. We took a lot of ingredients from the World of Warcraft trading card game, like the card types, direct attacking, sticky damage, the win condition. A really important ingredient from Battle Spirits, which is being re-released soon, which is the mana system, and then we came up with a few important innovations like hero powers, no responses, weapon durability.
Bro, has anybody ever heard of Battle Spirits? I actually need to look this up right now. I have never heard of Battle Spirits. Is it Battle Spirits Saga? Let me see. Card game. Oh my god, it was made in 2009. Battle Spirits is a 2-player collectible card game jointly developed by Bandai. Okay. Surprise Inc. after a franchise which also includes several anime series, manga serializations, and other merchandise like toys and video games. Interesting. I've never heard of this game before.
Ability, the fatigue mechanic, and general low complexity. So I
quite
asked,
popular in
Mike
Hong
Elliott,
Kong?
who was the designer on Battle Spirits, how he comes up with new ideas for games. Because he's designed like hundreds of board and card games. And I have not designed hundreds of games. So I was like, how do you do it? How do you go?
But he has designed hundreds of millions of dollars worth in games.
And he told me he gets all of his game ideas from games conventions. He just walks the show floor where everyone's showing off all their new stuff that they've been working on, and he just lets ideas come to him. He just soaks them up. And when he leaves
One thing that's great about Indiana is Gen Con for this exact reason.
This is a supermarket. It's full of ingredients. So this is a picture of Gen Con where I went in...
Yeah, let's go! Let's go, Indiana! The only thing we have here that's worth a damn! Gen Con!
2008 or 9, and this is where I discovered Battle Spirits, which ended up becoming a big inspiration for Hearthstone. So I used Mike's technique
going there. It's
to
great,
find
dude.
and become inspired
It's great.
by his
I've
games.
been there
So that was
before.
really cool.
I feel like I need to go more as a card game player.
6 years before it shipped, but I missed the launch party for Hearthstone because my son was born that day. And we hadn't launched on mobile yet, but I got a special build of the game on my phone, and I spent a lot of time playing Hearthstone on my phone while I was holding my son in the other hand. And being a dad really changed the way that I could play games. I couldn't just sit in front of my computer for 4 hours raiding. I had to get my games in while at the park or while in the bathroom. So Clash Royale came out a couple years later.
And he said in the bathroom. And we all know that's why Hearthstone was made, so that Ben Brode could game in the bathroom in between, having to watch his son. Now we know why it was created.
I'm super jealous of Clash Royale because if you have 5 minutes, you are 100% sure you can get a game of Clash Royale in. And I thought that was just brilliant. And then 5 years ago, Hamilton and I, Hamilton's was the EP on Hearthstone, he's the CEO of Second Dinner, set out to build a new company, try something new. And we didn't know that we were going to make a collectible card game. But once we decided to do that, I once again found myself playing every mobile digital collectible card game I could find. So here's all the games I was playing in 2018. And that game on the left,
Plants vs. Zombies.
It's really cool.
I didn't know they had a card game, dude.
Oh my gosh!
I knew about the Elder Scrolls Legends game, which I
I
wonder where they got that name from.
So it's great. It's a vertical mobile.
All right, have a good night, Tim. We'll see you around, dude.
Card game, and in some ways, it was the proof I was looking for that there was something really cool in the space. So, what was the recipe? Wow, my voice is better when I talk deep. What was the recipe for Marvel Snap?
Brode.
What ingredients did we gather?
What ingredients?
This is the mystery I'm setting up to pull you all through the rest of my presentation here. So we had a bunch of ingredients.
Player versus Zombie Heroes is actually a cool game.
And it was time to prototype.
I enjoyed the original Plants vs. Zombies.
This is what the first prototype for Marvel Snap looked like. I'm serious. Okay, so we were sitting around brainstorming game ideas, and Hamilton said, I've always wanted to play a turn-based strategy game with the backgammon doubling cube. And so I booted up Hearthstone, and every turn of the game, Hamilton said, would you double the cube right now? If your opponent doubled the cube, would you concede? And we got to immediately feel the impact of that mechanic without having to build anything. And through those initial playtests, we realized a couple things about this doubling mechanic.
Something else to keep in mind here, guys. Ben Brode played Hearthstone when Warrior was playable. Who wants to tell him the bad news?
We got to immediately feel the impact of that mechanic without having to build anything. And through those initial playtests, we realized a couple things about this doubling mechanic. It increased the emotional range, right? Instead of just 1 star per match, you're playing for potentially a lot more stars. We spent less time losing, right? In a normal game, if you have like a 5% chance to win, you got to play that all the way out, right? Because you might win.
Yeah.
And that period of time where you're like probably going to lose can be pretty grueling, like the final 6 hours of a game of Monopoly. But when you're incentivized...
Dude, I love how he's sprinkling these little jokes in here. I think it went over a couple of people's heads there, but oh my god, let's go.
To bail out because you're going to lose less cubes, you can just leave and you spend less time in that grueling zone. Games that you don't play all the way to completion are faster, obviously. But there was 2 other things that I think had a really big impact that I'm going to dig into a little bit more. So the first is zero sum is zero fun. If 2 players play a game and one of them wins and the other loses, and it is as fun to win as it is not fun to lose, you have created net zero joy. You just moved happiness from one person to another.
Hearthstone, take notice of this mechanic. Just because someone wins doesn't mean something is fun also. I feel like this is another part, like specifically in Hearthstone, like when you're just like playing the same deck over and over and over again, and it just becomes like literally you have no net gain in joy, but you always feel bad whenever you lose. This is the biggest problem in Hearthstone right now, is that one person's high roll is another person's low roll, and that's the reason why Marvel Snap feels so good, is because of the retreating mechanic. If something like, you know, really stupid happens and you're like, nope, out of it, I don't have to waste my time with it, it makes a lot of sense. Hearthstone is reversed right now. You don't feel much. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Like, this plus 30 joy units only happens when I go up against friends.
So we were trying to avoid this situation. There's a bunch of ways to tackle this. The first is
so every
bots.
game should go to the turn timer,
so
so no one wins.
There's a player who's winning
exactly.
and nobody's losing. So I really like PUBG Mobile. I played a lot of PUBG Mobile, and the first time I played it, I got first place. And the second time I played it, I got first place again out of 100
You
people.
absolute high roller,
you know, I used to
Ben
play
Brode.
Eliminate on iOS, and I played Metroid Prime Hunters on Nintendo DS. Maybe these skills are coming back to me after all these years. And so I posted this screenshot on Facebook, and I was like, guys, I just won my first 2 games of PUBG Mobile. I'm so good, which is, you know, a little annoying. And all my friends jumped on in the comments and were like, dude, you played 100% bots in those first 2 games. And I was embarrassed, so I deleted the post.
Okay, all right, yeah, sure. Yeah, that actually, like, think about it. The game is, like, baiting you, where it's like, oh, man, you did really good against these bots. You hit first place, now go up against real people, instant 99th.
But if they hadn't told me, I would have experienced all of the joy of victory without any of the agony of defeat. So instead, I just have to bask in the joy of having a rad-looking character avatar.
Looks exactly like
so
it,
at GDC 2014, my mentor and the original game director of Hearthstone, Eric Dodds, gave a talk about Hearthstone design values. He talked about little victories. The big victory is whether you win or lose the game. And the little victories are things that happen during the game, anything that makes you feel smart or powerful. So imagine.
And this is extremely important in Hearthstone, having as many little victories as possible, because that net zero thing earlier, that could sometimes not feel bad. Like, losing a game may not feel bad as long as you do what you do, you know? Like Naga Mage combo. If you do the Naga Mage combo but still end up losing, like, you still have the dopamine of doing that turn and feeling like you were really smart. I feel like he's going to touch a lot more on this part in particular.
You're playing a game of Counter-Strike, and you come out of the spawn point and someone headshots you and you die. You had no moment where you felt smart or powerful during that game. But let's imagine you're playing a game of Counter-Strike and you run out and you're just blowing up everyone on the enemy team, and eventually you lose, but you still felt like awesome while you were doing it. That's little victories. So essentially, little victories add a little joy, even if you lose. So on Hearthstone, we avoided cards that blow up enemy mana crystals or force your opponent to discard cards, because they could potentially create scenarios where you never get to feel powerful.
Cards that delete mana crystals and cards that discard stuff from your opponent. Literally, this most recent expansion, we had a card that deletes that discards from both your opponent's hand and from your hand. But then there's also the card that mills stuff immediately from the top of your opponent's deck. I don't think there's any destroy mana crystal cards right now, but I mean overall that is still. Yeah, Rin, I guess, is the only exception to this philosophy as of right now.
In Marvel Snap, there's 6 turns. You always get to play 6 turns. You always get to do something. You get to play some of your cards and feel a little bit powerful while you do it. But the cube had one of the biggest impacts on the zero-sum paradigm.
Feel good playing Rin, confirmed.
So we found that when your opponent snaps and you retreat, it could feel like this. In some cases, it made losing feel like victory.
I saved the cube.
It's a strategic retreat where you don't fall victim to your opponent's gambit. And we realized we could emphasize this with some presentation changes. So this is what the concede button used to look like. Here's what it looks like now.
And
here's what
and I feel like
changes. So
I feel like Marvel Snap gets a lot of flack for this, where it's like, oh, they're brainwashing you into believing, oh, that you didn't lose that much. No, literally this exact concept that he's talking about, where you turn like a situation where someone's always going to feel bad about losing, suddenly you don't feel bad about losing every single game. Like, that is important. So that way people don't just lose a game, automatically close the app, and then never open it again. And it's just like, it feels good to win, but it also feels good not to get completely blown out of the water and to not be punished for leaving the game early. Like in Hearthstone, if you leave the game early, you throw away all chances, right? Like this is a big deal. Like, changing words around like this isn't brainwashing. It's just, it's smart marketing. because you're not conceding the
This is what
game.
the concede button used to
You
look
are
like.
retreating.
Here's what it looks like now. Here's what it used to look
And this is a bit of a different example, but like instead of saying you lose and making the player feel dumb,
like when you
you
retreated,
can
and
say
here's what it
escaped. Like, it makes sense. This all makes sense.
looks like now. You didn't lose. You escaped. You're a genius.
Imagine if I had a good hand, expect to win, but at least 2 to 4 cubes, but ended up only winning 1. I mean, but there is those situations where, like, yeah, your opponent leaves when you have like the nuts, but then you can literally do the exact same thing again in like less than 5 minutes. So is that really a bad thing? Because you literally had 2 games where you had the nuts.
Yes. So this presentation stuff works in reverse as well. When you lost a game, we used to have the announcer go, "You lose," and we cut that because it's emphasizing exactly the emotions we're trying to minimize.
And that's a smart thing to
So
do.
the effects on the zero-sum problem were encouraging, but the really game-changing effects of the cube was the depth. Please excuse me for 1 second.
And there is a lot of depth to the cube.
Oh yeah. So we often talk about poker as a game that has never required an expansion to remain strategically deep for decades. And it's because of the power of betting and bluffing mechanics. Hearthstone with a doubling cube is all of the depth of Hearthstone plus all of the depth of these betting and bluffing mechanics. And we thought, hey, what if we could reduce the complexity of the genre and lean on the cube mechanic to make up for some of the depth that we'd lose by simplifying the genre.
Yeah, when's the new expansion
So with that
for
insight,
poker
we set
coming out?
to build the simplest card game we could that would allow for us to use a doubling cube. So I love games that are simple and have a lot of depth. A lot of people use these words, complexity and depth, differently. So here's how I'm going to define them today. Complexity is the cost you pay before you can play the game. It's the learning you have to do. Depth is the fun part. It's the interesting decisions. So here's a review we got on Metacritic when we launched Hearthstone.
That's some
This
street
was a
of
common
card
criticism
games.
at the time when we first came out with the game. And I think it's because a lot of people misunderstand the relationship between complexity and depth. A lot of players want deep games, and it's true that you have to add complexity to add depth. So people see games with lots of complexity, and they assume it's got the depth that they're looking for in a game. But you can add complexity that doesn't add any depth. For example, if we had a rule that says every time you play a card in Marvel Snap, you have to yell the name of your card into the microphone or you lose, that's an important rule. You have to learn that rule, but it doesn't add any interesting depth to the game. On the other end, there's complexity that yields an outsized amount of depth. We often call mechanics that yield a lot of depth for a small amount of complexity elegant designs. For example, tic-tac-toe is a game that has very little complexity and also very low depth. Go has a little bit more complexity, has a humongous amount more depth. Monopoly has only a little bit more depth than tic-tac-toe, in my opinion, but a lot more depth. This top right box, I chose Magic the Gathering.
Wait, hold on.
because it
So
has
he
a huge
said
amount of
doesn't
depth.
have as much depth, but a lot more depth. I think he misspoke.
But also AI researchers called it the world's
Snakes
most
and ladders.
complex
Yeah, there's
game.
no fun to it.
So you can
I
mitigate,
enjoyed
adding
Chutes and
more
Ladders
depth
when I was a
by
kid.
slowly
Maybe that explains a
introducing
lot.
new
Oh,
concepts
God.
over time, right? And if you get more depth by adding complexity, shouldn't you just keep adding more complexity to get more of that depth? I actually think
feel like it
there's a
plateau at
depth
some point.
limit. If
Yeah,
your game
yeah.
already takes a lifetime to master, what does adding more depth get you? More lifetimes? You only get 1. So I think the goal is, how do you reach the depth limit with the smallest amount of complexity?
Say what you want about Ben Brode, but he does a very good job at explaining concepts so everybody understands. Like, simple does not mean easy all the time, you know? Like, maybe that's not the greatest example to say that particular phrase in, but it's just really interesting how he's making these ideas very clear.
If your game has this much depth, perhaps you should remove complexity and depth until you get there. I hope the little star is visible there. However, removing complexity can have a weird effect on your team. So in early Hearthstone, taunt was supposed to be a one-time effect.
All right. I learned this the other day, and this is what made me watch this video for an extra 10 minutes. So I'm really familiar with this past 10 minutes because this is what I watched yesterday. And I learned something new about the game.
If you attacked an enemy minion with taunt, it would lose taunt. And there was a bug one day where that stopped working, and it just kept taunt forever. And we thought about it. We said, this is simpler if they just keep taunt forever. They just always have taunt. So let's just not fix the bug. And a lot of members on the team came up to us and said, hey, the game just got a lot less deep. There's like all this really interesting combat decisions where you're trying to drop taunt in the correct order. And they're not wrong. It's less deep. But the thing is, the team had already paid all of the complexity cost to learn how this works. So when you remove complexity, they only feel the resulting loss of depth. So I've been talking a lot about rules complexity, but you know what matters even more than rules complexity? Text complexity. This is the filter through which people will learn the rules of your game. And you can make the game seem much simpler or much more complicated depending on how you explain it. And we've all felt this when we sit down to play a board game with our friends, and you're just baffled at the end of the explanation. You're like, let's just play one turn. So this talk by George Fan at the 2012, entitled "How I Got My Mom to Play Through Plants vs. Zombies," is the best GDC talk of all time. It's fantastic, yeah. And this slide was mind-blowing to me. If you put more than 8 words on the screen, players will not read them. I think he's right. And so here...
And this is just going to go... This is just going to get worse as time progresses. Pretty soon it's going to be 6 words, then 4 words, and if you have any words, then people just won't care.
There's every tooltip in the first 15 minutes of Marvel Snap, and here are the word counts for each tooltip. And I'm very excited about this. There's some flavor dialogue that comes up that is more than 8 words every once in a while. But I don't care if you don't read that stuff, because it's just flavor. This is the important stuff that you need to learn. The thing that's really hard to do is card text. So we realized that on Hearthstone, for a digital game, we didn't need to write out as much of the edge case stuff. So your hero deals 2 fire damage to target hero or ally became deal 2 damage.
Okay, that's much better.
The average word count for Hearthstone was 9 words. And for Snap, it's 11, partially because we don't...
Yeah, Holy Smite back in the day.
So we've fallen short of the...
Does someone want to tell them?
Which makes me sad. But to make sure that text complexity stayed low, we would audition our cards with people. We would sit them down and show them the cards. And if you had to read a card more than one time, we said, raise your hand and let us know, because we don't want any card text to be confusing enough that you'd have to read it twice to understand it.
And then they started adding more cards into Marvel Snap.
Low complexity, high depth, and the doubling cube really helped us get there. It's easy to understand, it has a ton of depth. However, the simple mechanic of the doubling cube ended up taking a ton of iterations to get just right. So when we played it physically...
And now this is where game design becomes interesting. Because there's always, what if we just add no limits to the game? Sometimes doing that is not good. And where they finally ended on settling on the cube, I think this is really interesting.
With just paper and a die, we had no limit. You can just double the cube as many times as you want to. We knew we needed to have a little more structure when we moved into a digital prototype. So we said, okay, you can double once a turn, and we'll just throw up a dialogue box that says, hey, your opponent wants to double the cube. Are you cool sticking around, or do you want to concede right now? And it was pretty jarring, because it interrupted. You just have to stop playing your cards in the middle of your turn to process the dialogue box. So I said, okay, what if we move it to the end of the turn, right? You do all your actions, and then we'll tell you what your opponent wanted to do, and we'll compare to what you wanted to do, and we'll resolve it then. And that helped. We started to experiment with some stuff like, could we make the betting and bluffing have even more texture? So we added not just the ability to double the cube, but would you also like to mega double the cube? We didn't like the word octuple. It sounds kind of nerdy, so we went with mega double. And this was pretty cool, because you could get them to limp in with a double, or slam a huge bet with an 8x there. But there was a lot of dialogue boxes, and a bunch of the people on the team didn't even understand what are these numbers? Why do I care about all this? I just want to play the card game, and you're getting in the way of all these dialogue boxes. So we had what I think was the biggest inspiration in this whole journey, which is what if we moved the double acceptance from an explicit, yes, I accept the double, to an implicit acceptance of the double. So we just had the cube automatically double every turn, and we said, hey, next turn, the cube's going to increase in value. Do you want to stick around? And if you do, we're just going to assume you've accepted the double.
256,000 cubes. This is the solution to the question you asked earlier, but it's another one of these videos.
The term arcadey after we made this.
Could you simplify it?
Much faster
since we're watching this and we still got 40 minutes.
We loved it. but players missed the ability to hit a button to really project their confidence to their opponent. So we added the ability to tap on the cube to take it from doubling next turn to going to mega doubling to going up to 8x next turn. And this caused another problem, which was if you're playing most of your games for hundreds of cubes, but on turn one, you're only playing for one cube and your hand is just slightly less than average, you should bail out, right? Just like only play the games where you have a chance to win hundreds of cubes.
And he's literally found the hole in his game design, and now you have to start from scratch. Like, creating games.
By having a great hand. So people were conceding on turn one most of the games. We realized we had to bring in the range so that the average cube game and the starting cube game were much closer in scale. So we got rid of all the auto doubling and just let people snap a couple times. Hopefully that would bring it down. People missed having the opportunity to bail out before the game ended. They really liked feeling like an excuse to leave. So we combined all of our approaches up to now. We added one auto double at the end of the game, so you could bail out on turn 5 if you want to. We had one snap where you could tap on the cube to double it. Eventually we added the snap back, and that's where we ended up. That's how we got there. It was quite the journey.
9 different iterations.
Why did we call tapping on the cube a snap?
And now here is the funniest part of what I've seen so far.
And for that matter, why is the game called Marvel Snap? It's because naming is impossible. This is one of our many brainstorms where we tried to name the game, featuring such hits as
Danger
Marvel
Room.
Cosmic Posse.
Hold on, let's read a couple of these. Inception, Smash Up, Multiverse. Marvel Multiverse does make a lot of sense. Throwdown, Zone, Orb, Cerebro. Wait, Marvel Cerebro, Danger Room. They just started writing down names of characters at some point. Ultimate Team, Hero Battalion, Overwhelm, Dominion. Marvel Dominion and Marvel Conquer sound pretty good. Marvel Countdown, Marvel Dimensions. He is kind of right, though. Like Marvel Tesseract, like all of these you could make a case for them. But what I don't see anywhere is the word snap. I don't actually see snap.
Marvel all caps Orb. We were briefly considered calling the game Infinity Stone, Heroes of Marvel, but we didn't do that. So normally I use a naming hack.
Infinity Stone, Heroes of Marvel should have been the
from
name,
an
dude.
XKCD comic where he talks about 2-syllable words where the emphasis is on the first syllable and how much fun these words are to say. Does anybody know what this poetic term is called? No, close. You got it. I don't know how to pronounce it. I ask because I don't know how to pronounce it. So I think it's trochee is what I think it is. And they're just fantastic.
Oh, wait, like trochee and,
like
oh God, something,
word to type. Does anybody know the name of any famous companies? Just yell them out.
There's a literary
Famous
device
companies.
for it.
Well, not all at once. I can't hear you. I did kind of ask for that. Okay, I'll just show you their answer here. So these are all trochees. Riot, Blizzard, Google, Facebook, Marvel, Netflix, Lego, Tesla, Meta, Intel, Apple, Call of Duty, YouTube. Every word up here is a trochee. And I also believe that what you name your game or company or whatever doesn't matter at all. So what's the first thing you think of when I showed you this word? Was it
Second tier
one of those, right? Some of you is one, some of you is. This one probably most of y'all thought about, the one on the left here. And I don't know about y'all, but I never imagined deer constellations or space dollars when I saw this word. You can literally name stuff whatever you want, and people will fill that name in with new meaning, whatever you tell them it is. In fact, your game's name doesn't even need any real words in it. These are all nonsense words. And nobody's like, I'm sorry, you say this game is called chess? What's a chess? So why Marvel Snap? Well, for years we struggled with the narrative wrapper for the game. Hearthstone has an evocative and grounded wrapper. It's the game that denizens of Azeroth play in a tavern. It's not so much a story, but a setting and a vibe. So what is Snap's setting? Does it have a story? And how do we tell it? Well, this is the thing I hate more than anything in video games. Welcome to Marvel Snap. The evil villain Thanos has assembled the all-power Infinity Stones. Here's some. I hate this so much. And to demonstrate the point, I've created the story tier list for you. So at S tier, we've got a story for the ages. At F tier, we've got a boring story. And here's the thing. At A tier, no story at all. It's just not that much worse than having a story for the ages. So if you are choosing between having a boring story or just cutting all the story out, cut the story out, please. And I consider vibes and setting to be really different than story. Some people say, when I say story, they hear plot, and I think that's accurate. I don't have to understand Street Fighter story to be able to enjoy it. And the game doesn't even try and explain it to me. They just say, Blanca versus E Honda, fight. And nobody asks, well, hold on, why are they fighting?
And that's a really good point, dude. No one like will ask these like little questions that I feel like some game designers are like, oh, what if these things don't add up, or like there's like no story or whatever. Sometimes it doesn't matter. There's just two people in a fight, or you have a 1v1 with like people in card games, and it's like I don't need to know the story of World of Warcraft to enjoy Hearthstone. It might help to enjoy the Easter eggs,
but despite that, we tried to ham-fist the story in anyway. So here's an actual presentation I gave the team here. The Infinity Stones have been destroyed. Their shards spread throughout the galaxy. Forces have moved to collect them. They cannot fall into the wrong hands. The stones must be reformed, but he can never know. Marvel snap. So the plan was not to actually tell that story in that way in the game, but to use it as the setting for why you'd want to get cubes, we called them Infinity Stones at that time, and what your goal is in the game. So players would collect Infinity Shards, and as they got more and more of them, they'd assemble Infinity Stones, which would unlock new features in the game. And we ended up pivoting away from these gameplay mechanics and the theming associated with them, as you'll see here. But we loved the name so much that we decided to keep it. And to tie the name back in, we named our most iconic gameplay mechanic after the name.
Oh, snap.
So, thank you. Naming it a snap was a last-ditch effort to make our name make any kind of sense, now that we've stripped all the Infinity Stone stuff out of it.
And now you can no longer call it Infinity Storms.
The name without the Infinity Stone theming. We could have changed the name to Marvel Cube or something. Well, we love the energy behind it. We love the snappiness of it. And, games are over in a snap. It's a snap to learn. At the end of the day, I think the approachability and impact, inherent fun of the name makes an impact. Okay, so let's check in on our recipe, see how we're doing here. We've got the doubling cube from Backgammon, and 5-minute mobile-friendly experience from Clash Royale. But the rest of the inspirations, once again, came from physical board and card games. Pause for impact, okay. So this is my dad, and when I was a kid, he used to give me his old business cards, and I would design card games on the backs. So I got my first job at Blizzard. I kept all my old business cards, imagining that someday I would get to use them.
As well as a special pizza menu.
And this is the first physical prototype that we made on the development process for Marvel Snap on the back of my first business cards.
Destroy all cards with 4 power.
Cube. We tried to keep it simple with only 2 numbers per card. We had some kind of weird leveling system. But the big thing that we were trying to achieve was simultaneous reveals. So this is my favorite 2-player board game, Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation by Reiner Knizia, who's the most prolific board game designer ever to live. He's got many hundreds of games to his credit. It's like Stratego, but when you fight an opponent's unit, you both play a card face down and you reveal your cards at the same time, and it impacts the battle. I love the mind games in this game. It's incredible. I also love this game, the Game of Thrones board game by Christian Peterson.
I have to admit, I've never played these games before.
When 2 armies fight, you play a card face down, you reveal them at the same time. Super fun. I found myself really drawn to this particular ingredient, and I wanted to experiment with it in card games. So I know this prototype had simultaneous reveals, but otherwise I cannot remember for the life of me how to play it, because we only played it one time. And after we were done, me and Hamilton looked at each other and we said, yo, this game sucks, which was very demoralizing. When you're playing cards simultaneously, you need some kind of context. What do I think they're going to play? And then you could play around those suspicions. So we need something to start on the board to give you that context. And I should have known that we needed context, because I used to participate in professional rock, paper, scissors competitions under a freeway overpass in Los Angeles.
All right. This last point is where I stopped watching. But oh my god, mind games. Just think about mind games when he's talking about this, okay?
Rock, paper, scissors is totally random, right? It's pretty boring. There's very little strategy in rock, paper, scissors. The thing is, in these tournaments, you get 1 minute of taunting before the match begins. So most people come in character like the Barber or Sergeant Scissors. But sometimes people just use the whole minute and go, paper, 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 paper. And hilariously, that adds some context, right? Are they telling the truth? Or are they trying to double bluff me?
They're trying to gambit.
So this game, Smash Up by Paul Peterson, doesn't have simultaneous reveals, but you can play your cards to locations, and the locations have special abilities that make each game a little different. And I thought this could be a really cool way to give the game we were working on some context for simultaneous reveals. And they did. So Mojo World, for example, is a location that gives you plus 100 power if you have more cards than your opponent. Okay, I bet they're going to play their cards to Mojo World. Or maybe I'll let them overcommit there, and I'll try and take the other 2 locations. And this core decision making was simple, but immediately fun.
Boom.
In our earliest
Simple does not mean easy. Simple never means easy. It just means one or the other. There's only so many options, but there's a lot of, decisions and a lot of thinking that goes into, am I going to play the card on the middle location, the left location, or the right location? Also, I don't know why there's a Twitter logo here, but okay. But in either case, simple does not mean easy. If you're going to take anything from this today.
Revealed, but we felt like that was a lot of information to absorb right at the beginning of the game. So we made them reveal on turn 1, turn 2, and turn 3 instead. So they gave us the context we needed, but I think more importantly, they increased the variance of our core gameplay. So I said George Fan is the best GDC talk, but this talk by Richard Garfield titled Luck in Games is my all-time favorite design talk of any kind. So I think most people misunderstand the relationship between luck and skill. A lot of people imagine it as a scale, where you got luck on one side and skill on the other, and games are somewhere along this scale. And we use the terms luck-based,
I think it's more of a spectrum,
skill-based to talk about where games land on this scale. But that's not how it works at all. So you can have games that are low skill and high luck, like Chutes and Ladders, or high skill and low luck, like chess. But you can also have games, like my favorite game to make fun of, Tic-Tac-Toe, which is low skill and low luck. And you can have games that are high luck and high skill, like poker. There's a ton of randomness in poker, but the best players are winning again and again. Games in the high luck, high skill category, I think are super fun because they include a ton of interesting decisions, but they also have exciting moments and are different every time you play them.
So let's put RNG in our games, but it's money-based, and the more money you pay, the less lucky, and the more money you pay, the less lucky as well. Bro, it's quite literally poker, though, if you think about it.
So all card games have some amount of randomness because you shuffle.
Pay more, get more chips to have more chances of getting lucky.
Hearthstone, I think, has less variance at its core than other card games for a couple reasons. One, the mana system isn't random. You just get one every single turn of the game. Smaller decks decrease the variance some amount. And because you aren't drawing resources, you're just drawing more usable cards.
Who wants to tell them about Renathal?
You effectively have a higher rate of card draw. And those all reduce the variance of Hearthstone's core gameplay rules. But the thing is, we wanted Hearthstone to have more variance. So we added a bunch of variants to the cards. So Arcane Missiles deals damage randomly.
Who wants to tell them about Lightning Storm?
Damage. Animal Companion summons a random beast. And this was successful at making Hearthstone more random, but players didn't love it. Right? We got a lot of feedback that Hearthstone felt too random. I think part of it is
let's ask Raynad's opinion on Crackle real quick.
Put the word random on a lot of cards. But also, there's two different kinds of
still bad? Wait, what?
So input
talking
randomness
about poker, or
is
talking
where
about
there's a
Hearthstone?
random event, and then like drawing a card, and then you have to make a strategic decision in the face of that random event. For example, the hub, it's a random card in each player's hand, and then you and your
And this
opponent
is how
have to figure out
random
how to
can
use
necessarily,
that card
like,
to your
you
best
know,
advantage
it's not
after
always
you've
random.
seen the random event.
Because sometimes just
So
add like
input randomness
another
is awesome.
layer of
It
depth.
puts you in new situations you've never been in
Lightning
before.
Storm.
You have to think on your feet and solve problems on the fly.
Nah,
Games
it's just
without
Shaman
a
is
lot of
bad.
input randomness,
More so
there's like a
the
right answer,
thing.
right? Like in chess, players
Lightning
have
Storm's
to,
a good card, dude.
the really
It's
high
a
levels.
debatably good card.
It's not like, okay, what piece do I move on turn one? You've got like an opening move. People memorize a series of opening moves until you get to the fun part of chess later on. Because the random event happens and then you get to respond to it, you feel like you have a lot of control over the randomness in the game. And output randomness is the opposite. So output randomness is where you make a decision and then you find out if it was the right decision or the wrong decision. For example, Danger Room, you have a 25% chance every time you play a card there for it to be destroyed. You have to decide to play a card there and you're going to find out
here's the thing.
if it's the right decision or the wrong decision. Ragnaros, it deals 8 damage to a random enemy. Maybe it's enemy
Box
zero,
me, dude.
and you
Yeah,
win.
exactly.
Maybe it's
Box is another good
the exact
example of
minion you
this.
didn't want to hit and you lose. but you have to choose to play Ragnaros first.
You gotta choose to play the boss.
So output randomness is exciting. It's what like streamers, like the viewers on Twitch love to see. It's great stories.
Yes.
This is, I think,
Nothing
the
more
most
to add.
exciting, the best question we can ask players in games, which is it worth the risk? And as a player deciding, okay,
Yes.
I think I'm going to lose this game. I need to start taking some risks. I'm going to start playing cards at Danger Room and hope I don't get that 25%. I think that's really interesting depth.
Me,
and
Mom,
that's the
I'm
kind of depth you get
famous.
from output randomness. Having the ability, seeing that a random event's coming and controlling the odds, for example, destroying all the other minions, so Ragnaros is definitely going to hit the ones you want, is also some fun depth that comes from output randomness. And this is
this
interesting.
part.
If you have output randomness, players will say that they lost to the randomness, which has pros and cons. The cons are that it feels like you don't have very much agency and you just kind of lost randomly and your skill doesn't matter. But the pro is that as people, we are unable to grapple with our own ineptitude, and this provides an outlet for your ego.
Yeah, and another thing about losing to RNG that I feel like he didn't really touch up on here is that when you lose to RNG, there might be some players that are like, oh, I didn't make the wrong decision. The card made the wrong decision. I made the right decision because if I was going to win the game, X result needed to happen. But I, as a skillful player, went for the right out, and it's kind of like with poker. So that is a really important point whenever it comes to randomness in Hearthstone. There are some times it's bullshit. I will go ahead and give you that. But when you can really like add the odds in your favor, and you know the card is gonna hopefully do like one or two of two different things that you really need to have happen, that's skill. And then again, it goes back to the max excitement.
So locations, I think interestingly, are both input randomness and output randomness. And you get to choose which of those you want more of. So if you play to a revealed location, that's input randomness. You got to see what the location was going to be, and then you decide to play a card there or not. And if you play to an unrevealed location, that's output randomness, right? You play a card to an unrevealed location, and then surprise, it's Murder World. Your cards are dead. Mistake.
Mistake.
So we've talked about a couple of the impacts of locations, the randomness, the ads, simultaneous reveals, but they also have a couple other interesting effects. So in a collectible card game, over time, the meta gets stale. This is why other card games release thousands of new cards a year, hundreds of new cards a year, to keep the meta fresh. It's because eventually you run out of new problems to solve, right? I've seen this deck before. I know what it's trying to do. Locations give you every single game something new, something exciting that's going to happen, so it reduces the effect of a stale meta some amount.
And this is why I love Marvel Snap design-wise. Say what you want about the monetization, say what you want about the actual fun aspect. The design of the game is so simple, but it will always keep people coming back because of the locations. There's, I think, like 90 some locations or whatever, and with all the different cards that are available, like there's just so many different possibilities and so many different what's the word I'm looking for? I guess just possibilities. Yeah, possibilities and combinations that it just makes sense to where a game like Marvel Snap only becomes stale when you see, like, a deck like Shiri Red Skull perform as well as it did for the longest time, because it didn't matter what the location was, it mattered about the deck. So then you can start to change different parts of the balance so that way it can stay fresh. Hearthstone doesn't have something like this because the cards and the classes are essentially the locations, right? Where you have like a pool of cards to actually make work, so you have to figure out the puzzle. This is just one thing I love about Marvel Snap, because it does help prevent the meta from becoming stale, because it's not about the best deck at times, it's about what deck works in the most amount of locations.
And by the same token, it lowers the impact of imbalance, right? Everyone's playing the same deck because one deck is broken, and at least the location.
Every time a new location that limits you more and fucks with the deck you want to play. I mean, there's got to be counters, right?
But it lowers the impact of some amount.
Obviously, we need less locations like Sanctum.
I mean, still a lot of work to do for live ops, but it adds a cool lever for us, right? We can add new locations or change the locations to create live ops pretty easily. For example, we have this thing called hot location, where one day a week, this location shows up in 50% of all games. It causes players to change their decks to take advantage of the location. It adds some fun.
And it's funny because a lot of people in the Marvel Snap community hate this. They hate this because it makes the game feel much more stale for 24 hours. So it's kind of funny how this goes against that design philosophy of decks becoming less stale or the meta becoming less stale, but it's more so just like for one day this is like the deck to play or whatever. But I feel like whenever it comes to hot locations, they should try to stay away from the locations that are like the Nexus or whatever, where if you only win that location it does really well, or if there's like a specific card that does really well with one location, you know? I feel like they should try to stay away from that.
Live ops flavor to the game.
Wait,
unless...
Which is stupid because the deck that works with the most locations means even less cards end up being useful. I'm actually against that part of Marvel. See, I disagree with that. Because then it's about your deck synergies mattering more with the locations. But I'm just talking about statistically, it's funny to think about how which cards perform the best at the most amount of locations. Like, it's another layer of complexity, but it doesn't actually change what the game can do, you know?
We make the hot location make the current best deck even better, and then it increases the staleness of the genre, like we did when Mr. Negative was the best deck, and we made the peak the featured location. Huge mistake. So we had 100 locations going into launch.
Oh, wow,
and late in the
100.
game, we decided, hey, wait a second. What if we cut 60 locations and instead launch with 40 locations, and then we can launch one new location every single week for a year? And 40 was not the right number, but we did cut most of the locations and have been releasing one every week for a year, and it was a great way to kind of front load our launch with tons of live ops content. Okay, so we had
that's honestly smart, so that way you don't run out of content ideas.
We had locations. We started having a ton of fun.
Because the other doesn't perform well in most locations.
All in all, this prototype,
the same 12 cards that are
starting from that first prototype to this one, took about 2 days.
I mean, that's just coming down to power level of cards then. It's less about the locations.
We took a break from this and started trying to design some other games because we weren't sure this was it. But we just keep wanting to come back and play this one. We eventually printed out the prototype instead of writing it on some cards because we were fighting over the only copy of Galactus. And we used this prototype years later to prototype 2v2. So 2v2 is just 5 locations, and your team has to win 3 out of 5 of the locations.
And this would be fun to see,
We wouldn't
honestly.
have been able to do it easily without the physical prototype, I think, because it's hard to prototype
Also,
visually.
question,
Now,
why does Ben Brode look older in this picture to the left than he does right now? Just pointing that out there. Maybe it's just the haircut, but he looks significantly older in this photo.
I'm not saying we're ever going to do 2v2. It's just something we were experimenting with, but it was fun. It was fun to try. Okay, so here's the full
I want to do
recipe
some
for Marvel
2v2s.
Snap. We had the doubling
I also want
combat
Hearthstone
game and
2v2s.
simultaneous reveals and mind games from Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, locations with abilities from Smash Up, 5-minute games for Clash Royale, and a few, I think, really impactful innovations, 6-turn games, 12-card
Card
decks.
type? I guess, yeah, that
I
meaning
think
like
for the
only
first time,
minions
maybe
versus like
in a
spells.
collectible card game, only one card type, which means there's like no card types, right? It's not even a thing. So these innovations were impactful, but it's not clear to me that your game needs any innovations to feel fresh and exciting and unique. For example, I think if you asked players of Marvel Snap, what are the top 3 fresh things in Marvel Snap, I think none of the innovations would be on that list. So with the basic core gameplay figured out, it was time to move to our digital prototype. And here's the first digital prototype. We were prioritizing moving fast, so I think this took about 2 weeks to make. I don't know how to do any networking stuff, so it was a hot seat prototype where both people play on the same screen. We played a bunch on the iPad. This is a big iPad, but it looks bigger. That's my son's 4-year-old hand there, so the scale's off. So we tried to make this stuff super easy to change so we could essentially
So why is it Marvel Snap a trading card game? Because it's a collectible card game. You don't trade things. Same thing with Hearthstone. It's a collectible card game, not a trading card game.
We tried skipping turn 1, doing turns 2 through 6. We tried 3, 4, 5 cards in the starting hand. We tried 9 cards per location, 6 cards, 3 cards, 4 cards per location. We tried it all. So everything up to this point was done while the studio was just 2 people, me and Hamilton. Not that we had all that much stuff. We'd scribbled on some cards and spent a couple weeks on a prototype. But I think having the smallest team possible really allows for a dramatic pivot.
Or a location.
Because you spend less time.
What do you mean by LCG?
Explaining the vision and getting buy-in from.
Getting a physical version.
So my first year on Hearthstone, the team was about 10 people.
I guess the only way, like, you could make, a living card game. The way that you could make Marvel Snap an actual card game, is if they had, like, the locations, like, they would have to be digital, right? And then you would just have to do the math yourself sort of thing. But it's also like, bro, then that means that all the cards that they sell for like 60,000 or for 6,000 collector's totems, like they're gonna be available already. So people are just gonna play that. How are they gonna monetize
came
it?
into a meeting one day and said, "Hey, we're gonna take all
It is
of
all
the
possible
engineers,
though. It's not like
and we're gonna
Hearthstone.
move them on to help ship StarCraft
Hearthstone's
2."
almost
I
impossible
believe
to
about 3
replicate
people
as an
left on the
actual card
team,
game.
and we were pretty sure the game was canceled. We just thought, "Oh, that's got to be it. They're never coming back." The people left on the team were Ben Thompson, the art director, and Eric Dodds and I. And Eric Dodds was the first lead designer. At the time this happened, there was a ton of momentum in another direction. We were working really hard on basically some other project. And when this happened, it allowed us to be really flexible and experiment quickly and try crazy stuff. And the rest of the team wasn't totally gone. They were around for play tests and some conversations and stuff. But essentially, at the end of the year where those team members came back, we had the totality of
So this Spire just released their board game version not too long ago.
Once
I can
a
see
team
Marvel Snap
gets really
doing
big, turning the ship becomes way harder. So late in the game on Marvel Snap.
Well, at the same time, though, having cards like Jubilee would be kind of hard to replicate, right? Because you would have to like pick a card from your deck. You'd have to like do this. Hey, opponent, choose a card or whatever. There's probably a few cards that have to change for like the physical version, but I could see it.
A really big pivot where we changed all of the theming and got rid of some currencies. And the team, up to this point, had been giving feedback that they were worried that we hadn't really locked down some of our meta progression stuff just yet. There was a lot of change. And so I knew that this pitch to change stuff was not going to go down easy necessarily. And so I met with everyone on the team individually to walk them through the pitch, give them the opportunity to ask questions, make sure that they felt heard. And it takes weeks to manage this kind of change management.
And you got to give credit to Ben Brode for literally talking to everybody personally. Like, dude, that is a game designer that cares about everyone's input as well as making the best product possible, dude. Like, this is exactly the kind of person you want on this kind of team. Like, kudos.
And, even the idea of having to do this adds a huge amount of friction to deciding to make a pivot. I think the worst thing you can do early on is not pivot when you should, because you miss the opportunity to maybe do something great. So eventually we did end up adding some more folks. And here's our first 2-device build that our chief production officer, Young Woo, got working. Apparently he was a secret
There's too many minions,
engineer,
dude.
which was a delightful surprise. You can see we started with 9 cards per location here. We were experimenting with 5 turns. We tried some wild stuff like a left versus right approach to locations to see if we can get that like face-off battle feeling going. Our art director, Jamaro Kindred, began to pretty up the game a bit. And we felt like we were cruising forward on our prototype, but we ran into a snag. I think every other card game has had cards that say stuff like destroy target creature, things like that. We had a bunch of cards like that. And on Hearthstone, I think we had a great UI for this. You drag a card out, an arrow attaches to your cursor, and wherever you move your cursor, the arrows, so you know you're in targeting mode when you drag a card out that requires a target. And to cancel the battle cry, you tap on the card or just tap on any card in your hand. But on mobile, once you drag a card out, we have nothing to attach a cursor to. So you just don't know that you're in targeting mode. People kept tapping back in their hand to play another card and canceling the battle cry. It didn't work very well. It was fundamentally broken on mobile. So we had to build a whole new UI. The screen darkens and desaturates to let you know you're in a new mode. The potential targets are lit up in color. They float above the board, and you could tap on the target you want. So I think this flow is
And
just
they
much
didn't
worse
fully
than
download the whatever.
But it's not like we could just remove targeting for the mobile version of Hearthstone. So when we started to run into these issues in Snap, we said, hey, what if we just get rid of targeting altogether? In reality, every Marvel Snap card requires a target. You have to target the left, middle, or right locations. So essentially, we were asking players to choose 2 targets when cards required a target. And we realized that we could imply the second target from the first target. So here's Electra. She used to target any one cost card. We changed her to target a random one cost card at her location. The UI is much simpler.
Okay, so
cost card.
Hold on.
From the first target. That we could imply the second target from the first target.
Meaning that the card... Okay, so this actually does make sense. So, yeah. Okay. The way he explained that kind of confused me for a second. But, like, the target, obviously, placing the card at the right location versus, having to also, do that and then choose which card that you kill. And honestly, having this kind of randomness does make a lot more sense, in my opinion. Because then, like, with cards like Electra, it's not just going to be a blatant counter to, like, all the new 1-drops you print or whatever. Like, there's still some randomness to this card, and so it kind of brings down its power level a little bit. but this does make sense.
A random one-cost card at
Less
a location. The UI is much simpler.
Confusion, you know?
And usually there's only one-cost card at her location anyway. Another way to remove targeting is by implying a target through card ordering. So here Mystique used to be able to choose a target to become a copy of, but in her next iteration, her target is implied by playing her after you play the card you want to copy. We didn't have that many cards that had required targets. It was like 10 or something. But we changed them all, and the game felt much better. And with that solved, we continued to make progress in the game, and the prototype.
Okay, these portraits look much better, by the way. I like those portraits a lot.
And eventually, I think it looks great.
By doing so, they killed the card. I mean, they made it less powerful, yeah, but it's a beginning card for a reason.
To design the core gameplay for Marvel Snap.
It's not like Electro's supposed to be meta, right?
As it turned out, we would be paid back for that good fortune with 4 years of struggle trying to come up with a core loop and satisfying progression model for the game. So here's a diagram of our core loop. Don't read this, please. This is one of the many iterations we were working through. It was madness.
That is a lot. Yeah, that's a lot.
Where you'd have to do better to get up to the next league, and that's where certain cards were league restricted. We built a hero collector that worked like World of Warcraft garrisons, where you'd send heroes off on missions to bring back cards for you. This is a sphere grid with every card of the game on it, and you'd have to decide which cards you want to make progress towards. So the big lesson we learned from all that was we needed to simplify.
Bro, they did this on Paint. This looks like they literally made this on Paint, by the way.
This to this, we cut a ton of stuff. And we saw this and we were like, yes, we did it. We got there. And we went into our next testing phase. And unfortunately, it was still wildly overcomplicated. We had these leagues, but we pasted over the problems we were having with these bizarre theming changes, with Infinity Stones. We had a buy-in. You got to choose the stakes of the game before you went in. We had this weekly
clan names. Wait, are they going to bring in clans?
Here's a shop where you can just buy the cards you wanted directly, and they rotated every day, which means after not that long, the only cards remaining are the cards you definitely don't want to buy. This didn't work at all. And so we went from this in 2020 to this. And this is what we shipped with. And I always feel pretty dumb when I spend so much time like analyzing a design problem, and I'm like, aha, the answer is to add more complexity, only to realize that the answer was to simplify and remove complexity.
Again, simple does not mean easy. Simple doesn't mean easy. Being able to, like, this is actually something, to give an example, in the artist world, whenever, like, someone is, like, coming up with, like, lyrics or something, dude, like, sometimes you have to go back and you have to just, like, chop off the fat and make it to where you just have the main meat and the potatoes, so that way you can do more with less. And that is extremely, extremely important when designing a game. Again, simple does not mean easy.
Pascal makes me feel better. I would have written a shorter letter, but I did not have the time. So speaking of time, I'm almost out of it, but I wanted to wrap this up by boiling it down to 4 takeaways. But before I do, I just wanted to say one last thing. The design of the core gameplay of Snap was, I think, foundationally important to the whole experience, but it's only like 1% of the total amount of work to make the game great. What's much more important is all of the decisions we made as a team that add up over 4 years of game development. So we're basically a fully remote studio at this point, so I don't have a lot of great pictures of the whole team, but I wanted to say the team at Second Dinner is bonkers, and I'm super lucky to be a part of it.
Was Dean in that photo? I don't think Dean was in there.
Chefs need ingredients, so stock your pantry. Be the speedboat until your direction is clear. Embrace randomness, input or output. And simplify, even if your team hates you. All right, that's all I got. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, everybody.
Wait a minute. Why is there still like another like 10 minutes? Is this like Q&A? I'm assuming this is Q&A.
So
okay.
I believe we have time for some questions.
Hello.
Hello. Greetings. Oh, and if you got to fill out the thing to rate this. Evaluations. Thank you.
I love the game. Been playing for a couple of months now. Finally got Thanos. Having a great time.
Thanos
I'm wondering about the how much Disney has an influence or collaborate on the creative aspects of the game. Not only recently you got to buff Wolverine a little bit and as a key character, But also, I mean, I'm a big Marvel fan, and recently back in the Marvel United third season, and then I see a lot of the characters which I usually don't care about, that I'm suddenly care about because I know them from Marvel Snap. Then I wonder if this is a big part of the Disney overarching scheme.
Great. So I'll just repeat the question just in case it's not going to end up on the mic. The question is, what's the collaboration with Marvel like? How much are we a part of their strategy? And do we, collaborate on making characters powerful and stuff? So Marvel is just unbelievably great to work with. They're just like wild good. So the team at Marvel Games, we couldn't have made this game without their help. They basically
The Marvel Game Studio different than the Marvel Movie Studio, because I've only heard bad things about working with the Marvel Movie Studio. At least if you're as on the clock, and that
do
from what I hear, there's a lot
what
of
we're really good at, and what they help us with
strict
is make sure the
deadlines.
game is authentic and awesome. So we submitted an image of Gambit, throwing his cards, and they were like, "Hey, just so you know, like the cards don't pass through that ring; they come from there out or whatever." We're like, "Okay, I wouldn't have known that personally, but they help make sure that anybody who sees this game who's a big Marvel fan, says, oh yeah, that's exactly the right color, of that character or whatever." But they also they know we work in a multiverse. And so we're like, hey, can we do band variants? Can we do King the Conqueror, but DJ King the Conqueror? And they were like, yeah, sounds good. But can you put him in outer space? That'll be even cooler. And we were like, oh, rad. So they're not pushing us in a direction. They're much more like collaborators. It really feels like we're on the same team trying to make a game together. So
And I feel like that's actually really important, is that you let the game designers create the game, and then it kind of like what he was saying, it's like, oh, by the way, we want to do this. Then you have someone that understands the properties being like, oh yeah, that character wouldn't do that. Collaboration is a good way to describe that.
If you Marvel, I highly recommend it. Yes.
Okay. When is merch?
Well, yeah, that's on Marvel. Marvel controls all the merch, so I tweet at Marvel, I guess.
So the real question would be...
Also, when Hearthstone merch? We need more Hearthstone merch, bro. There's come on, that's the easiest thing that they could sell. You want to monetize Hearthstone? Just sell more T-shirts, dude. Sell sweatpants. Sell sweatshirts, dude. Come on, more Hearthstone
how much time
swag.
was there between when you started brainstorming this to talking to Marvel, having something to show them, and then actually getting contract?
The guy who runs Marvel Games, Jay Ong, used to work with me and Hamilton long ago. So we had a relationship that was existing, which is partly how a brand new studio gets to work with Marvel. It's kind of ridiculous. But he knew that we had made great stuff in the past.
Wait, what about
He wanted
Jay?
to work with us again. So we had the suspicion that we might get to work with Marvel, but it was probably on the order of months before we showed them anything. And I don't know how long.
Hearthstone sexy night gear is what we need.
So
Thank you so much.
appreciate it.
Sorry, you've got lines on the other side.
Oh, my bad. Oh, my goodness.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm here too. Okay, hi. I was wondering, variants that spawn other cards don't show that variant. If I play a baby Doctor Doom, I don't get baby Doom bots. Why?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
It's a great question. Sorry, you don't get the cards that spawn other cards. The cards that they spawn are not variants of the. It was something that we would like to do at some point. I think it would be great. We also want to do variants for cards that are spawned by locations, like rock variants. By the way, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, if you're watching this, please hit us up. We'd love to do a rock variant together.
All right. Thank you.
We'd love to do it. Thanks.
I gotta be honest with you, Ben Brode. I don't think that's gonna happen. I mean, even if that does happen, I feel like The Rock is gonna ask for a lot more money if you're something like that. I don't know. The Rock seems very money hungry right now. I don't know how else to describe that.
Okay, over there.
The live action Moana
you
definitely rubbed
discussed,
people the wrong way.
complexity versus depth, and how a card that says just deal 2 damage still can have a lot of depth and hit the depth limit that you need. But eventually you've printed deal 2 damage.
I love
and you
Ben
have to
Bit
start,
Hate Snap.
complexity.
Oh, you love Ben
And I was
Brode,
wondering what
you
your
hate Snap.
strategies are for.
I mean, you probably just don't like the
6, 10 years into
monetization of it,
and
right?
when
The
all the
gameplay
simple
is fun.
cards are printed. There are no more simple cards left. What to do?
Okay, so the question is, you mine out the simple rules, and then eventually you end up with only non-simple stuff. What do you do? I had a whole section of this talk called "The Primal Fear of Working on a Game with a small amount of design space." It's horrifying.
Isn't that a
both
pro,
on
though?
Hearthstone and on Marvel Snap.
Play more
we
games,
had a
learn the
point
game
where we're
faster, become a pro at it.
We were looking at games like Magic the Gathering and around 30 years later, and those games are much more
And I
complicated.
agree with you. I'm
And so
completely
at least
free
I
to play with
imagine-
Snap.
I'm
I haven't paid a penny for it.
imagine that they just don't have that same level of fear of like, what if we just run out of all the cards? At some point, we will have designed all of the cards, right? And that's it. We pack up shop. But what happened actually on Hearthstone was that there was a huge amount of design space, much more than I thought there was at the start. And so, you know, it's scary to trim back and end up with a very limited amount of design space. But it's just never borne out in the scary way.
Okay, you like control games.
We always find more design space.
It's kind of hard to do in Marvel Snap right now, but there are control decks.
But it's never run into the spot where we haven't ended up there. Now, over time, your audience will stop growing potentially, right? Like, you know, we all wish the audiences keep growing, but at some point, that maybe it's not as true. And at that point, the complexity wall at the start is not the thing that matters as much. It's the additional complexity you're adding. And so all the current players have already paid all the complexity cost. And so if you add a new mechanic or a new card type or a new zone or something, you just have to teach them that little bit of additional complexity. And so you can add design space over time to give. And
that's actually a good way to describe why Hearthstone keeps adding in like keywords, for example. Like we've already got the opportunity cost learned, and now since we just need to add just one more thing, just one more thing, just one more thing. It does become a little bit more complicated when it you know, getting on new players. But Hearthstone's already been in the game for like 10 years, so it's like at this point it is important to, you know, have an avenue for new players in order to learn your game, but it's also about pleasing the people that are still playing.
Give yourself more room to design more stuff.
Thank you so much.
Hearthstone made a new mode by adding BGs.
Most most mobile games, including Hearthstone, they're horizontal, right? At what point did you decide to use a vertical orientation? What design space did that open, or did you just do it so I could play while I'm driving or holding?
Yeah, right. Please don't play Marvel Snap while you're driving.
This to this.
So the question is, when did and why did we decide to do vertical orientation? I think we really wanted to make a mobile-first collectible card game. Right? Most other collectible card games that are on mobile feel like or are ports of PC card games, and we thought this is just. If we
Marvel Snap has the opposite problem, where it's PC ported is.
I think we wanted to start with
not nearly as good as the mobile platform.
Started the whole game with that kind of as a design constraint, and tried to make sure that every decision we made. We tried some weird stuff like. We weren't sure if we could fit all the locations on the screen. So we had like a carousel of locations you could swipe back and forth between. And that we didn't end up going that direction. But we were that committed to a vertical display. Thank you, appreciate it.
So I have a question about like the simplicity of your text on the card. So like how to fix the issue of being some misunderstanding when the text is short? Because like sometimes I don't really understand the whole mechanism. So I need to like try
fix that by playing three games
so I can
at
know
the same time.
The real mechanism, because like the other cards like putting their like extreme circumstance on the card, but you're not using this. So like how you address this issue of like possible misunderstanding.
Yeah. So the question is about what you do when there's a clash between wanting short card text but being clear and making sure that people actually understand what you're saying. You know, it's interesting. There's a bunch of cards. I think it was called Shadow Madness in Hearthstone, which says take control of an enemy. Minion like this turn only. And what it doesn't say is that it gives the minion charge, right? If you took control of an enemy minion, you wouldn't normally be able to attack with it. But the fact that it's only for this turn, it's obvious that you must be able to attack with it. And so we just kind of left that off the card.
Not exactly, but when you play the card,
it
makes it obvious.
Where you can just say, look, this is like a little bit, we don't explain everything, but like you can just try it. And you'll learn after the first time. And ideally, the thing that you, like the best scenario for you is the thing that actually happens. We often, when showing people cards, and they ask a question like, wait, I'm not sure about this edge case.
Yeah, you take a snap of your hand.
Is going to happen. What's your suspicion? And we would write it down. And if the suspicion is the correct thing, it might be worth it for us to have less text because they would like, I'm not sure, but I think it's going to do this. That was good enough for us in a lot of cases. But yeah, if the answer was they got the wrong thing or they couldn't guess, we would try and rewrite the card, even if it meant adding more text to it.
So that follow the intuitive stuff, right?
Sorry, what was that?
Like follow the intuitive thought? Like
yes, right. We try to make it intuitive, exactly.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, appreciate it. Here.
Thank you. I have so many questions, but I do want to ask about Fatui. You talked about how a lot of design is going into how to minimize the zero-sum game and also like using things like bot to increase like player satisfaction. So I'm wondering like what are some design iteration or choices that went into like the first-time player experience to make sure that players have that sort of satisfaction and how that impact, like what kind of cards they get when they first play the game and what like if they're going to see any bots, etc.
Yeah, so I basically, for both the Hearthstone first-time user experience, I'm sorry, the question was how do we make sure that Fatui is awesome, especially with the zero-sum component.
Yeah, or so, just like any design-related consideration with the Fatui.
So the entire Fatui for Hearthstone and Marvel Snap is just copied from George Fan's talk that I mentioned. It's just we just did exactly, laid it out, and we just copied it. It's like exactly that. If you play through the Hearthstone and Snap and Plants vs. Zombies, we just stole it all. It's just genius work. So if you're interested in Fatui design, that is the
don't fix it, ain't broken.
of Fatui design right there. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello. I have a kind of similar question that was asked over there, but as you mentioned, Marble Snap doesn't have keywords, which expanded like the amount of text on the card. So, but when you have keywords, a player has to learn those. So how do you balance the kind of streamlined paraphrasing versus the explicit explanations?
Yeah, the question is keywords versus no keywords. How do you balance those two things? I paraphrased your question. This was a conscious choice. When you have keywords, you are trading complexity for potential depth, right? Because you get more interesting stuff on the card. You can make the card do more interesting things if you can add more words to it. But if you don't know what the keywords do, then you can't understand what the card does. And so for
a problem for
Snap,
newer players.
we made the conscious decision. Actually, our first designs had no keywords, and eventually I tried to represent on reveal as like present tense and ongoing.
Yeah, I was about to ask
like,
what the keywords are, but yeah, on reveal, ongoing.
People weren't picking up on it, so felt like we were forced to add on reveal and ongoing. But those keywords are self-descriptive, right? Like there's no way to actually like find out what on reveal means. It's not in the game. It's just it happens when it reveals, right? So we made the decision to, instead of adding more depth by having more keywords, to make every card understandable. Even if you'd never played Marvel Snap before, you can read the card and hopefully get what it's trying to convey.
And that's where like the difference between Marvel Snap and Hearthstone is very obvious, because like with Hearthstone, there's a bunch of keywords. There's always going to be keywords. And as a newer player, you're just not going to understand it. One thing about Marvel Snap is that you read the card, you immediately know what it does. It's very simple. It tells you what it does. I feel like the hardest card to understand is maybe like Leader, because they've changed Leader so many times. I don't even know what the hell Leader does anymore at this point. And that is one thing that I find really weird about Marvel Snap, is that they are changing cards like weekly, monthly almost. Like they are doing monthly balance changes. And I'm not really too sure how that's going to help like players from getting confused about effects, because there have been times where it's like, oh, right, Red Skull now gives +1 attack instead of +2 attack.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's 2 minutes left. Is that what that is? Yes.
Hi. When you were designing the game, because it was a studio that was fresh, did you get the IP from Marvel that decided I'm going to make a Marvel game, or was it I'm going to make a game and it's going to be a card game or it's going to be whatever, and then what if we got the IP and made it Marvel themed? What was that?
So the question is, what came first, Marvel or the game mechanics? So the answer is Marvel. Marvel came first. In fact, we started working on a different game, and when the Marvel thing started to happen a little bit more, we started skinning that game as a Marvel game. And when we were doing that, we're like, this is just not working. This is not a Marvel game. The things that are awesome about Marvel, which is the awesome hero fighting against an awesome supervillain, or a team of heroes facing off a supervillain, that's not what this game is about.
Last update, I only realized there was an update because I keep seeing a new deck.
C2. Okay, what if we designed a game from scratch to highlight what's awesome about Marvel, which is that experience? And so we made a card game where the focus is on that one card type, the heroes and villains of Marvel. And that's kind of
how they communicate. Updates needs to be changed. Isn't it all through the client?
Thank you. Last question, I think.
Hey, so the monetization.
I usually find out on Twitter though, so I agree. They probably need to put that in the mobile
curious what the
platform.
overall philosophy for Second Dinner's monetization is. Like how you guys feel. How do you integrate it into the design, and like what were some of the models you guys threw out?
So the question about monetization, how it's player friendly, and how we did all that. it was difficult because there's not like a lot of games that have a lot of analog to the way we're doing things, right? A game where you have thousands of
Yeah,
cards
it's not
you can
obvious
sell
right away.
booster
They
packs,
don't they don't
You
tell
have-
you as
you have
well.
like
Like in
100,
Hearthstone,
200
it physically
cards, way
tells
less
you, you know.
than other card games. And in games with that few cards, like games like Clash Royale, a lot of these games sell power, right? You can just get higher numbers by spending more money. And because of the way the game works, like the crunchy numbers we have, like the math gets really hard. If you had like, okay, I need to get 623 more power over here, and he's got 426 less over here. How do I? It's really challenging. So there wasn't a lot of analogs for us. And the one that was the biggest inspiration was actually Pokemon Go, because it's a collectible game. We really wanted to focus on being a collectible game, and I think that they have a monetization system where you can't buy Pokemon in that game, right? If you see somebody else with incredible Pokemon, you're like, damn, you play a lot of Pokemon Go. You're never like, damn, you spent a lot of money, dog. Like it's all about the effort you put in. And so trying to come up with a solution that involved being able to speed up your process and go up the collection track faster. That was basically the only inspiration we had. All right, well, thank you so much. I'm so sorry I didn't get to all your questions. Thank you, everybody.
All right, so I'm really glad that I watched that entire thing. What about you guys? Do you guys enjoy that? Like, that was just like, it was just extremely nice just to hear him talk about game design. And I feel like I learned a lot from like what makes Hearthstone successful as well as what makes card games successful. Because the biggest thing that I feel like a lot of people overlook is that yes, Hearthstone is a 1v1 game. A lot of card games are 1v1s, but that doesn't mean there needs to be one winner and one loser. It doesn't mean that, you know, you can't have the little victories that make losing a game, which is inevitable, by the way. You can't not lose a game when there's a 1v1 happening. One person wins, one person loses. You got to be able to bridge those, essentially. You got to be able to make it feel less bad to where people don't just be like, oh, I hate this game because I always lose, or I hate this card because this card always beats me. And it's just like, there needs to be little victories. And I feel like that was the biggest thing that I learned about this video. Is that if a game has little victories and the gameplay is like actually fun, then boom. Exactly. It's just an extremely fascinating topic the entire time. Like I am really happy that I watched that, and especially like considering that I was like really pissed about to end the stream before we started watching that. Like, dude, like that was like a really, I don't want to say therapeutic, but I mean, hey, dude, at least I feel like I can play a little bit more Hearthstone rather than just ending the stream right now.